I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Kristi Dosh, the author of the Athletes NIL Playbook, which you can order right now. A surprise early release for that. Very, very timely with the huge, massive news that we got on Friday with the House settlement. Kristi, I want to get into all things House settlement, College Sports Commission, the future of college athletics, all that stuff. But let's start with a big picture question here that I think a lot of people have. Colleges now being able to pay athletes directly obviously is huge news. Was last Friday's approval of the House settlements with the start of the revenue sharing era in college athletics, the CSC, was that the most pivotal day in the history of college sports?
Oh, that's a good question. I saw somebody tweet the other day. They thought there had been like three huge moments in college sports, and this was number three. I think that the way TV ended up being sort of deregulated and broken up so that the conferences could all have their own television packages. Long before I remember that happening, but I've researched it. That was obviously a huge moment in college sports. But this is up there because, we've spent so many years talking about amateurism, and there have been so many, decades and decades and decades of restrictions on athletes, not just getting paid, but restrictions on having cream cheese with their bagel. We've all been joking about here at the convention that I'm at, how far we've come from that. So I think this is definitely up there in that top like 2 to 3 moments.
What function does the NCAA have in college football specifically now that the College Sports Commission is the policing entity?
I think it's really just down to when they initially go through the process for eligibility for high school recruits. They are still involved in that eligibility piece on the very front end. They still have rulemaking authority. They didn't cede everything to the College Sports Commission, but definitely this is a huge shift in power from the NCAA over to this College Sports Commission.
One of the things that we went back and forth on Twitter is how the CSC states that all third-party NIL deals that are above $600 have to be cleared by Deloitte Clearinghouse, who will determine if the deal uses fair market value, which I put in air quotes because my question is it fair market value just whatever someone is willing to pay you for a service?
Well, so here's actually an important thing that happened Friday that was the one surprise, I would say, in all of this. They took fair market value out. When you go on the College Sports Commission website and you look in their frequently asked questions, there's actually a question on there about, or I'm sorry, it's not on the College Sports Commission website. It's on the NIL. No, it is on the College Sports. I've been looking at so much stuff. It's on the College Sports Commission website, but it's frequently asked questions about NIL Go, which is the platform on which athletes are going to disclose these deals of $600 or more. And there was this FAQ about was Deloitte going to determine fair market value? And they said, no, we are going to determine a reasonable range of compensation. And so I'm right now in Orlando at this athletic directors convention. And one of the conversations we've all been having, in the lobby at night is there a difference between fair market value and reasonable range of compensation? And why did they choose to change it? What do they think they're protecting themselves from by this word change? And I don't know the answer to that. But yes, they will be determining for associated entities, so boosters, donors, anyone with a close tie to the university. They're going to be looking at those deals more closely to ensure that they meet this reasonable range of compensation that's going to be based on a number of factors.
Why $600? Like what's the significance of that number? I'm trying to figure out why set that number so low at a time when we all look at that and go, buddy, if you think that's going to be the catch-all, that's just going to be you're going to have to deal with everything.
That's such a low threshold. And I've had a lot of folks tweeting me and asking, well, why don't you just do a bunch of $599 deals? It's because they're going to consider deals between the same parties in the aggregate. So if it's the collective doing a deal with an athlete, they can't do 599 deals and avoid having to go through this clearinghouse. They're going to consider that in the aggregate. It's going to have to go through the clearinghouse. It also means a lot of brand NIL deals are going to have to get disclosed because they're over $600, but they won't be subject to that reasonable range of compensation review, as long as that business isn't some sort of sponsor or donor of the athletic department. If, say, you're a female athlete and you're doing a deal with Dove body wash, unlikely that they're a sponsor of your athletic department or that the owner is a big donor of your university. So you'll have to disclose it and put it in this portal, but that deal won't be reviewed for that reasonable range of compensation.
Do you think athletes are aware that they need to get their NIL deals cleared if they're above $600? Because that feels like, oh my gosh, we're all of a sudden being tasked to do something in the middle of summer that I'm not sure that it seems like everybody is going to have all their ducks in a row ready to go with that type of documentation ready.
So yesterday I texted and DM'd a bunch of athletes I knew who are all at Power Four institutions, and they're all high earners who I expect will have to file deals with this clearinghouse. And what I asked them first was, have you ever heard of NIL Go? Because that's the name of the platform where you're going to have to submit these. And when this came out Friday, it said you had to start submitting deals as of June 7th, which was Saturday. But then later they came back and said, well, actually the platform won't be ready until the 11th. So it's like you have to disclose deals that happen from the 7th on, but you can't start disclosing till the 11th, and you only have 5 days to disclose them. So I sent this text and asked them, have you heard of NIL Go? I sent it to about 12 of them. Not one of them had heard of NIL Go. When I then said, well, that's the clearinghouse where you're going to have to submit deals of $600 or more, one of the 12 came back to me and said, oh, I did know we were going to have to start doing that. One. And I know that's a small sample size, like a dozen athletes, but again, a dozen athletes at Power Four institutions who I know are high enough earners that they're going to have to submit into that portal, and they have not gotten communication from their universities. Now, I'm not blaming the universities. I'm here on site with all these folks who work in these athletic departments, and a lot of them haven't sent things out to the athletes yet because they don't have all the answers. They want to make sure the platform is up and running before they send the email out to their athletes so that they can send instructions on how to use it. I think they're banking on there being some grace here at the very beginning if athletes don't meet that 5-day window to turn in their deals. And I think that that's true. I think that there will be some leeway for that.
Yeah, that's what I'm fascinated to see is the enforcement process with all of this and how it's going to be policed. So let's just paint a little scenario here. So if Arch Manning is getting $500,000 from Viore, which is a deal that I'm totally not jealous of at all, or whatever, best shorts in the game, but like Deloitte can flag it and say, nah, you're not necessarily using fair market value for this. And Texas can appeal it with an arbitration process. I'm not saying this is going to happen. This is a very hypothetical scenario. But Texas could appeal it with an arbitration process that'll ideally be done within 45 days. Can you explain how this whole process is going to work? Because it feels like we're going to have some of these things pop up in fall, and we might not even know about this, what this arbitration process is going to look like that could be happening behind the scenes, and we could be dealing with suspensions, or programs could be dealing with suspensions that could be looming if they don't do something about it.
So a few different things there. I mean, based on what we've all been told so far, a deal like that actually would not be reviewed for the value because that's not an associated entity.
Gotcha.
So that deal has to be disclosed, and that's it. Like it just has to be put into the portal. If the company or the individual on the other side is this associated entity, so they've donated to the university, they're an active sponsor of the university, it's really targeting collectives. I mean, they didn't come out and say that, but that is what's happening. It is targeting collectives and individual donors. Those are the ones that are going to have to undergo the value review. And Deloitte actually came out at the ACC spring meetings a couple of months ago and said that 70% of collective deals that had happened would not have been approved by their system. But it said that 90% of other deals would have met the criteria. So we expect that it's collective deals or individual donors perhaps, but mostly this is a collective issue that would be turned down. And you've got attorneys who are salivating at the idea of going after the clearinghouse when they turn down one of these. So you would get it rejected. You would have a chance to then either change the contract, change the deal to try and meet their standards, which is not what I expect will happen. Or, like you said, you can appeal it through this arbitration process. But there's been this argument here. There are quite a few of us here who are attorneys. And the last few days, we've all been sort of having a debate about whether you can bring a separate lawsuit or if you have to submit to this arbitration process, because the athletes themselves did not agree to this arbitration process. This is part of a settlement with this class. Some of them are members of the class, some of them opted out. Incoming athletes, there's this argument about whether they are subject to the class or not because they weren't current college athletes when this case was being settled. And so there's been this debate about who would be able to file lawsuits challenging it versus who would have to go through the arbitration process. You see arbitration a lot in professional sports, but that's collectively bargained by the athletes who are employees. Here we have athletes who are not employees, who have not collectively bargained, many of whom did not agree to be part of this settlement, and now they're being bound by this arbitration. So I would expect to see some of both. You will see some who will move forward with the arbitration process, and you will see some who get attorneys who are going to try to litigate this through the normal channels.
Do you believe the CSC, College Sports Commission, CSC, for those who are seeing that acronym more and more, that's what that stands for, that's being run now by Brian Seeley, who did this enforcement role with Major League Baseball, and that's kind of why he was brought on by the Power Conference commissioners. That's an important caveat with this. Do you think that they will be able to successfully govern college football, or is this just going to feel like the NCAA with a new title?
No, I don't believe they will be able to. I had a collective text me yesterday and say, we will be submitting 0 deals to this clearinghouse. And I was like, please don't tell me that. I don't want to know these things. So I fully believe that there will be under the table deals. And I just saw a headline this morning, I think in the New York Times, about how, everybody's predicting things are just going to move back under the table. I believe that's true. After speaking to everybody here, there've been a lot of questions, even from athletic directors, about who's going to monitor and enforce that athletes even turn this in, because a lot of schools already had processes in place where athletes were supposed to disclose their deals through companies like Open Doors and Influencer over the last 4 years. And I've asked previously, like, what percentage of deals do you think athletes are actually submitting? And they've told me 10 to 20%. And one of them caught me in a hallway yesterday and said, I saw you tweet that. I think it's more like 5%. So the bottom line is athletes were not disclosing there. There weren't really any penalties for them. And so you could argue that like now this is going to seem more serious and like there's these bigger penalties, but it's actually the schools who are going to be on the hook. There was a panel here at the convention yesterday. Ross Bjork, the AD at Ohio State, was on that, along with some other ADs. I wasn't there, so I can't remember who else was on that, but I saw a transcript from that and people sharing tweets of quotes from that. And they were talking about how it's the schools that the penalties will be enforced against if athletes aren't disclosing this. But the ADs I talked to in the hallways later were like, how am I supposed to make sure that they turn these in? How do I know the deals even exist? And, you can certainly exert some pressure over your own collective. And a lot of these collectives were sort of coming in-house anyway. But it will be interesting to see, like, how do you know a deal exists in order to force the athlete to turn it in? So I do think now we see things go back under the table again.
Kristi, all I heard from that was the bag man is back.
Yes, absolutely.
There are student athlete organizations like athletes.org, but there's not a true collectively bargained union right now in college sports, in part because the NCAA has opposed student athletes, whatever you want to call them, as employees for so long. By the end of this 2020s decade, do you think athletes will become employees?
Oh, I do think it's going to happen. In fact, I was just on a panel a few weeks ago with Darren Heitner, an attorney that's very active in this space. We were in Pittsburgh in front of the Bar Association there, so it was all lawyers. And he said, I don't get why universities continue to oppose this, because it would actually be better for them at this stage of the game, because it's the only way they're going to get the kind of guardrails that they're looking for. And I had that conversation actually with a couple of folks here yesterday who work more on the athlete side. It was like, look, this system is better for the athletes. Like, the athletes at this point should stop wanting to be employees and collectively bargain, because they've got it better right now. If they became employees and collectively bargained, there would be some restrictions in place that we don't have now. There could even be some caps in place. even more than what we see now with this new revenue sharing cap. And the revenue sharing cap is subject to a potential antitrust lawsuit anyway. I expect that that could be coming any day now. So actually, universities would be better if they decided to move forward with this employment model. I've always sort of wondered what it would look like if Congress allowed for non-employees to collectively bargain.
Mm.
The issue is you have to be an employee in order to collectively bargain. So we can't get collective bargaining without athletes becoming employees. And there are things about being employees I don't think the athletes are going to like about how that's going to work and what that's going to look like. So I would be interested to see a model where they could collectively bargain without having to become employees. But it's also difficult with college athletes because their careers are so short compared to some professional leagues. I know NFL players, I think the average career is like 3.5 years. So it's about the same, but compared to like a Major League Baseball player who has a much longer career span. And so to organize a group of them and to get things done when you constantly have athletes rolling out and rolling in, it's a little more complicated, but it could certainly be done.
Yeah, then it gets complicated with the high school aspect of it. When do you officially join the union? If you're a high school recruit that gets a certain amount of money to be able to go to a school, then are you doctored in even though you're still, taking high school classes? It gets really complicated. It absolutely does, and I expect it to continue to get more complicated as these talks with Congress continue to progress here. Do you expect the revenue sharing model to put Group of Five programs, at least in college football, at an even greater disadvantage compared to the power conferences?
Maybe not. I mean, I'm interested to see how it plays out because now we've got these new roster limits that are greatly going to reduce the size of rosters. I saw an article the other day, and I think there was one Power Four program that had 150 athletes on their roster. There was another one that had 180. Now they're going to have to get down to 105. So where are all those athletes going to go? So actually, I think you're going to see where the Power Four had been sort of hoarding all this talent because they could have these enormous rosters with walk-ons. Now those are going to have to shrink down, and I think you're going to see some of that talent disperse. Sort of a trickle down effect there. So we'll see how that plays out, but I think that it could actually be better.
Last one for you. And I think we've seen some of this already play out a little bit, places like Tennessee with the talent fee. But what will change about the fan experience with this new revenue sharing era in
Yeah.
college sports?
I've seen quite a few schools that are implementing some sort of fee like that, or they're just going up on season tickets to generate more revenue. Several of the discussions I've heard here from ADs is that they've tasked their staff with figuring out how can we sell more tickets for every sport. At a lot of schools, when you get into the Olympic sports, some of those sports are completely free to attend right now. And I think they're going to move to a paid ticket model for a lot of those. As I heard people talk about revenue generation strategies here the last few days, so many schools in recent years have added alcohol sales. For a long time, it was almost impossible to get an alcoholic drink at a college football game. And over the last decade, you've seen like first it was only available in club spaces, and now you can get it in the whole stadium. But it's still, I would say, you still don't see it at every stadium. I'm not even sure if it's a majority. I think it will be at every stadium, except for maybe if you've got some private religious institutions that aren't doing it for, their beliefs and morals or something religious. I think everywhere else you're going to see it because that is a huge source of revenue. Maybe you see some higher end concessions. I mean, I just went to 2 days full of sessions on revenue generation and where are we going to come up with more money? And it's going to be to some degree out of the fans' pockets.
You have to make the in stadium experience better.
Yeah.
Like if you're looking for those opportunities, that just seems like such an obvious thing. I know Josh Pate has talked about this at places like Ohio State of wanting to actually make that in stadium experience better and finding the schools that do it and understanding that you have to just create a better in stadium product and do whatever you can and not just rely necessarily on that ticket revenue, even though you're increasing these prices, the talent fee, all those different things. Everyone go by the Athletes NIL Playbook. Check out all of Kristi's work in Forbes. Follow her at SportsBizMiss on Twitter. Kristi, you're the best. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.